Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. So yeah, today we could finally buy Guild Wars 2. Awesome, I hope you guys had a lot of fun spending your money despite the fact that you're not really getting anything out of it so far. But yeah, you can now actually pre-purchase the game if anyone's interested. Just go to the ArenaNet website or they've got all the information there. But yeah, very exciting. Lots of stuff's been really going on today. So today we're going to be talking about lore, and the footage in the background is from Guild Wars Insider. And what I'm going to be doing for the next couple of episodes is they put out a really long video, about an hour long, of them doing a run through the Ascalon catacombs. So over the next few episodes, the next few days, I'm going to be putting chunks of that onto the video so we can kind of watch their progression as we go forward. Hope that's cool, and yeah, let's get started. Before we jump into the questions themselves though, I wanted to talk a little bit about something we mentioned before. I saw some guys talking in the comments and on a Reddit thread actually about the last lore episode I did, where I was talking about the cycles of the Elder Dragons and the Sylvari, and how it seems like the Sylvari might have had cycles as well, like they rise every time the Elder Dragons do. That is completely my speculation. I try to make that clear when I'm doing these things, because I obviously do put a lot of my speculation in there. We haven't heard that for sure, definitely not, but that's just something that I think a lot of people widely accept and seems like it's could very well be true. But yeah, that was speculation. My bad, guys, if it came across any other way. But yeah, so the first question was asked by Archmage Ilmern, I believe, who says, a lore question here. The Charr opening cinematic mentions the Charr having killed their gods. Is there any more lore on this? What were the Charr gods like? And how and why did the Charr kill them? Or were there no Charr gods, and the statement in the cutscene is just a Charr expression or figure of speech? The story of the Charr finding their gods is really quite a big part of them as a race. As you might know, the Charr are split into legions, right? And you can play as three of those. You can play as Ash, Blood, and Iron, and they're all quite distinct, and they're three big bodies, three big hierarchical structures that the Charr work under, right? These legions. There's actually a fourth legion that you can't play as in Guild Wars 2, but they work as like the main antagonists during your early game if you're playing as a Charr, and that legion are the Flame Legion, or as the Charr now call them, the Gold Legion. These guys, this Flame Legion, these were the people that were in charge during Guild Wars 1's time, and they were the people that actually brought about the destruction of Ascalon and really started off the Charr's dominion back over that nation. What had essentially happened with the Charr, to try and cut a really long story down into just the relevant parts, the Charr were a really powerful force, but after the humans managed to assassinate their main leader, the Kan-Er, and they stole a relic from him, the Charr fell into infighting, and the humans managed to take advantage of this period of time and push the Charr out of Ascalon, right? But the way the Charr saw that defeat, they believed it was because the humans had found magic and power and strength in gods. The humans had named gods for themselves. Of course, the humans only came to Tyria because of the gods. The gods had sent them there. So the humans had these like celestial entities that were watching over them and saw them through their victories, while the Charr didn't have that, despite the fact that before the humans were around, the Charr were pretty much an unstoppable conquering force, and they had dominion over many lands, right? So the Charr saw this, and they saw the humans with their gods and their defeat here, and eventually they decided to try and find their own gods, and the people that kind of headed this were this Flame Legion. These people looked to magic, they looked to find their own gods and their own strength to defeat the humans, and really they succeeded. They found the Titans. These were a race that actually had a lot to do with one of the human gods, Abaddon. They were essentially a byproduct that he was producing. And these Titans had their own agenda, and they'd never claimed to be gods of the Titans. They were just powerful, hungry, immortal beings that were eventually going to try and attack the world and take it for themselves, and that was at the end of Prophecies. But the Charr had found these Titans at some point. The Flame Legion had found the Titans and named them the Charr gods, and through whatever means, which isn't entirely clear right now, the Titans had given the Charr power in return. It's quite easy to speculate later at the end of the story that because we know these Titans were essentially just a byproduct of one of the human gods, Abaddon, it's easy to say that Abaddon was manipulating the Charr through the Titans, but there's been no real official word on that, but that does certainly seem like that's the way things have gone. But the Charr found the Titans and they got magic, and they also managed to get their hands on the Cauldron of Cataclysm, which supposedly was given to them by the Titans, but the Cauldron of Cataclysm itself is a much older artifact that seems to hint that it came from one of the Elder Dragons, Kralkatorrik in particular. There's a lot of speculation you can go on about that, but that again is also off topic. All the stories really, when you start talking about this, all weave into each other in so many ways, it's almost mind-boggling. But anyway, so the Charr got this artifact, the Cauldron of Cataclysm, somehow with the help of the Titans, and they had additional magic. For example, in early prophecies, you hear a lot about how the Charr find power by burning big pyres, and they set up these fires in various areas, and that actually empowers the Charr. That's something that's not true about the Charr in Guild Wars 2's time, and that's because by Guild Wars 2, the Charr no longer have the Titans alongside them. So the Titans gave the Charr, and in particular the Flame Legion, this power which the Flame Legion then used to attack Ascalon, bring about the searing, and really put a massive dent in human resistance. And eventually that would lead to the Foe Fire, which kind of marked the defeat of humans in one way, but their eternal resilience in another way because they became ghosts. But because it was the Flame Legion that the Titans had connected with and given this power, it was the Flame Legion really that came to be the most powerful of all the legions. And during Guild Wars 1, it's now kind of, when you look back, portrayed as we weren't really fighting the Charr as a whole in Guild Wars 1. All the legions were very much against the humans in Ascalon, but it was mostly the Flame Legion that we were battling, and it was the Flame Legion that were in charge. Later on, though, during the course of prophecies, we found out about the real Titans, these Charr gods, and you, the player character, defeat the Titans, and then later on in Nightfall you go into Abaddon's realm himself, where he's creating the Titans in this place called the Foundry of Failed Creations, and you purify that area of all Abaddon's taint. Abaddon no longer has any power himself. That all leads to Cormyr, and the Titans cease to exist. So the Charr are left with a vacuum there. The Flame Legion are in charge because they have the most power, but now they've lost their gods. They've lost the Titans. So what do? Well, you find out in Eye of the North, they decide they're going to try and find some new gods. And then they look to the Destroyers, minions of Primordus, who have just begun to appear across the surface of Tyria. They're this new, very powerful entity, and the Flame Legion adopt them as their new gods. They're very fiery. In a lot of ways, they're quite similar to the Titans, in fact. I mean, they are the Flame Legion, and they look to these new flaming creatures as their new gods. And a big plot of Eye of the North is how a Charr named Pyre Fierceshot and his warband, the Fierce Warband, decide that the Charr don't need these gods at all, and they try and head their own little rebellion. Of course, once again, in Eye of the North, you, the player character, quell the upsurge of destroyers that have begun to surface throughout Tyria. Destroyers obviously do still exist in 250 years' time, but because of what you do in Eye of the North, the impression is that now the destroyers tend to stay underground, and they're much more subdued for over the next 250 years, rather than reigning all over the place. But this triggers a movement in the Charr, and the Charr decide now that they're going to kick the Flame Legion out, that the Flame Legion were never good for them, and they don't need gods. And the Charr kind of go through this big thing. There's an amazing cutscene in Eye of the North where the Charr are just chanting together, no more gods, no more gods. And they reject their gods, and the Flame Legion lose their power. Later there would be a rebellion against them led by the female Charr and a woman called Carla Scorchrazor, which is kind of a whole other topic, but the Flame Legion fall completely out of power, to the point where in Guild Wars 2 the Charr don't trust magic at all, and they definitely don't want any gods. So the Flame Legion are kind of this rebellious upstart legion that no real Charr recognise anymore, and they are enemies to the common Charr. So the opening cutscene, if you've chose to play a Charr, will say, we have killed our gods. Whether the Charr necessarily did that themselves is debatable, but they certainly did kill their belief that they need a god, which is quite ironic really, because they do owe their success, they do owe regaining Ascalon to having found strength in another race. They were never gods, they never really found any gods. I guess what you call a god is a changing definition though, but certainly they don't care for gods anymore, and that's kind of their story. The Flame Legion means nothing to the Charr anymore. They spit on them. There of course are still Charr around. I mean, the Flame Legion still exists, so there are still Charr that believe that they should have gods, but the majority of them, and particularly the ones that you're going to be playing in the game, do not agree with it. And that's also why really in lore you won't find many Charr that play around with magic. Obviously in game you can play a Charr Elementalist if you want, but the NPCs that you'll find around the Black Citadel and then Charr lands, you'll rarely find Charr that are actually using magic. There'll always be warriors, or there'll be thieves, or there'll be engineers. You know, they won't be playing with the magic side of things so much because they have such a strong distrust for them after the Flame Legion failed them. The other question I have for today comes in from Zeloraz, who said, I'm just starting to get into the Guild Wars 2 lore universe, well done by the way, and just wondering if it would make any sense for a warrior to choose to worship Grenth, the god of death. this can make sense. In Guild Wars 1, professions, so the warrior was a profession of course, were very much set up that each profession kind of spoke to one god and one god only. There were exceptions. For example, the dervish spoke to all gods. The dervish that was the whole point of the dervish. It communed with all gods. And the elementalist as well got different aspects of its power, shall we say, from different gods. And there was kind of this law set up that these professions would communicate just with one god. But at the same time, there was also a lot of law that suggested a human couldn't really function as a human within their human religion, which never really got a name. But you couldn't really function if you worshipped just one god. There were certain times when people might look to Dwayne, like for example for good health if they became ill, and there would be other certain times where they looked to the god of war and fire, Balthazar, for example, if they knew that a battle was coming up. So it was very much the situation in Guild Wars 1 where it wasn't very clear, but it certainly seemed that a human would have their profession and they'd identify more with one particular god, but depending on the situation, really, they'd have to acknowledge all gods. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that when you see that Dwayne, for example, if you're going to follow Dwayne, she preaches you shouldn't really hurt anyone and you should offer protection to weak people and you should give solace and shelter to those who need it and all these things, be a salve. While on the other hand, if you were to follow Grenth quite devoutly, you would be directly doing things that Dwayne would frown upon. So it seems like humans were in a little bit of a catch-22 in that they couldn't please all gods to the fullest of extent. If you really went full out Grenth worship, you would piss off one of the other gods in some area. It certainly seemed that way, so it was always this very complex, not fully explained relationship humans had with their worship of the gods. And now, of course, we come to Guild Wars 2, where one big fundamental change is that professions aren't tied to gods anymore, because gods are just a human-centric belief system, and we can now play multiple races. So you wouldn't look at a warrior in Guild Wars 2, say an Asura warrior or a human warrior, and say, ah, look, they worship Balthazar, because Asura wouldn't necessarily worship Balthazar, and neither would Norn or anything like that. So all the professions are now separate, more separate from the gods. But the question is, for the humans themselves, personally, do they still try and identify these things together? And I don't think so. I don't think that humans pair engineers with a specific god. I think that that's kind of been lost over the 250 years. And now a warrior human is just a warrior. It's just a choice of how this human decides to train their skills for combat. So if you were playing as a warrior in Guild Wars 2, again, this is speculation. I should point this out. They haven't said this fully, but just looking at all the facts and how everything's lined up, I would say if you were a human warrior, of course we're talking about a human warrior. If you're a Norn warrior, then why do you care about Grenth at all? But so if you're playing as a human warrior in Guild Wars 2, I see no reason why you couldn't worship Grenth, because there's been a bit more of a disconnect there. And even in Guild Wars 1, you could see that the humans would worship multiple gods at the same time. I mean, it was always it was never really fleshed out enough for us to know for sure one way or another. We heard about, for example, priestesses of Melandri would always leave food and shelter for people at their shrines, and we'd hear about other various practices from other gods, but we haven't had enough information to know for sure whether that would be something terribly taboo to do. But I certainly, for example, if I was role-playing in Guild Wars 2, or I was really setting up a good story for my human warrior, if I were to make that, I wouldn't consider that off the table. If you're looking to go into Guild Wars 2 and develop your own kind of personal story for your character that you've got worked out in your own head, then I don't think that that's against law. It's certainly not so unheard of that people would frown to hear that you're a warrior that's worshipping Grenth. Definitely not. It might be a little bit quirky, but it exists well within the realms of possibility for the human mindset with regards to their gods. But there you go, guys, that's Guild Wars 2 Daily. Again, thank you very much to Guild Wars Insider for the dungeon footage in the background. And yeah, leave any questions you might have in the comment section below, guys. And yeah, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. See ya.